Grade, right?
Hi there, this is Scott Silverman, and today I'm talking with Gary P. Caton, who's going to be giving a workshop for the Florida Atlantic branch of the NCGR, which, as we all know, stands for National Council for Geocosmic Research. And I'm really excited about the workshop that Gary is going to be giving. And let me tell you some of the basic information about that. And to do so, we will have to share screens. Are you seeing anything there, Gary?
Yep. Yes, sir.
All right. So, first, you need to know that if you want to find out any information or how to pay for it, you can go to this address that's on your screen. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to read it to some of our listeners who may be gardening or driving. HTTPS colon slash astrology FLA.com slash event slash Gary dash Caton CATON dash retrograde dash loops slash. Now, Gary is a transdisciplinary Hermetic practitioner who integrates diverse traditions and art forms gathered during the course of a full Saturn cycle. He was initiated an astrologer by a magnificent dream in 1993. And yes, Gary, I am reading your words here. He's since become an accomplished counselor, writer, podcaster, teacher, photographer, and mage. Gary is the author of Hermetica Triptycha,
Oh, beautiful. You got it right there. Yeah.
the Mercury elemental year, which we'll be talking about in a little while, and the host of the popular Hermetic Astrology podcast, which I have never actually watched, which I will. And you may connect with him at www.dreamastrologer.com. And it may not be essential, but I have the D in dream and the A in astrologer capitalized.
Yeah. It just gives people because the words kind of run together if you don't create some kind of separation. So,
Yes.
but it's not case sensitive.
All right, good. And here's the information again on your screen for those of you that might want to write it down. I doubt you'll be able to click on it and be connected. Sorry to say. All right.
Saturday, May 17th, 2025.
At 12 noon p.m., but we'd like you to sign in 15 to 20 minutes early to stave off any technical difficulties. Lunch will be from 2 to 2:45. The afternoon session will last from 3 to 5:30ish. And for more info or any questions you have about the workshop, I encourage you to get in touch with Chris at NCGR Florida Atlantic at gmail.com.
Chris dot NCGR Florida Atlantic.
Thank you, Chris
Yeah.
Dot. All right. Let's see. Now, anyone that's ever sat through any of my presentations knows I have Uranus square the sun in midheaven. So
Wow.
computers do love to act up. So let's go over. At first, I kept wondering
Is that
why
a
you
mutable
were,
square?
say it again?
Is that a mutable square?
No, very much
Fixed?
fixed
Ooh,
with
wow.
Antisha.
Oh, nice. Actually, the
And
antithesis takes
and
the edge
and
off
on
of
the
it a little bit.
angles. Yes.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
So here's more vital esoteric info for Gary. We have his email at Yahoo as well, his Facebook, his Instagram, his Twitter, his podcast, his YouTube channel. All right. You have no excuse not to be stalking him now for the rest of your life, or at least familiarizing yourself with
Easy,
his
big
work.
guy.
And here, the official title of the workshop is Retrograde Loops, Unpacking Retrograde Motion, and it's $55 for non-members and $40 for those who are currently NCGR members. You can purchase your tickets now at the astrologyfla.com address. Zoom links will be sent out on the Thursday before the event.
Excellent.
So I'm going to just read you some more of Gary's copy here so you really understand what you're in for, what you're up against on this Saturday. So, one section of the talk will be called or will concern itself with secrets of the retrograde loops. And it's funny, when I think of retrograde loops and the work Gary's doing, I always think of how Coca-Cola was advertised in signs and the loop that would go through the L. And I think there's a very famous Eudora Welty short story where someone is pondering the Coca-Cola sign and looking at where the loops go through the letters of the brand insignia.
Interesting.
My discoveries show that there are 8 basic latitudinal loop shapes potentially traced in the sky by a planet during its retrograde motion, depending on its relationship with its nodal axis. So this lecture will be presenting pioneering research which illustrates planetary nodes, the latitude cycle, and retrograde loops as 3 elements of a unified and novel picture of planetary motion. So we'll be going beyond simplistic pictures derived from a simple dimension of east-west motion along the ecliptic, which we know, of course, is celestial latitude, and moving into understanding and incorporating the vertical dimension of planetary motion known as celestial latitude. And in doing so, we tap tremendous predictive potentials. Now, I'm also addicted to declination, and if I'm going to go vertical, I want to do declination. I want to do vertical antisha. I mean,
Yeah.
we
I,
can have a
I love
lot of
that you brought
fun.
the Antisha in already. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Vertical
But
dimension is so vital to keep, like if we get in this flat land, I think it just unnecessarily limits our point of view. And that's the whole spirit of this thing is just to open up the vertical dimension. So I love that you're already going there. That's
and
fantastic.
it's great. And I'll tell you, I'm experimenting and working with altitude in the horizon system because I really believe that's a predictive piece that no
Yeah, the
one has
most
spent enough
elevated planet
time.
in a chart, 100%. The most elevated planet in a chart is usually a big deal. It's a thing to keep an eye
And
on, and it
and
may not even be near the midheaven.
and look, and there are the altitude versions of contraparallels, right? Plus 30, minus 30, 2 planets that are, in a partile opposition by altitude. I can't believe this isn't telling us something. All
I
right.
love it. You're a man after my own heart.
All right. Just again, more info in case you're still sitting on the fence. You can take a snapshot with your mind of this slide. Okay, first question. What does the P stand for in your name?
Preston.
Preston. I see. I was sure it was Peter. Oh my God, I'm already.
Yeah, no, Preston. And Preston itself stands for Priest Town.
Yes.
So So if you take the word Gary, which the root is gar, meaning spear, essentially, right? Spear.
Hmm.
So soldier. Gary essentially means soldier. Soldier from a priest town. So soldier of the church. So it's kind of like an old sort of what do you call those guys with the red crosses on their shields? The Templars.
Crusaders,
Yeah, or yeah,
Knights Templar, right?
yeah. Maybe it's an old, maybe it's a sign I was a Templar knight or something in a past life.
Well, that begs the question. I kind of think all time is going on simultaneously. So,
Okay,
well,
maybe I am a Templar knight in another life.
right now, a parallel life. Okay, what is a transdisciplinary hermetic practitioner? And can
Right.
we all become one?
100%. Yeah, yeah. No. So a Hermetic practitioner is a practitioner of Hermetic arts, of which there are three. Astrology is one, and then you have also alchemy and magic. So, and these are what are known in Hermetics as the three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. And so that's the main thing that why I don't simply call myself an astrologer because that's actually quite limited. There's three arts in Hermetics, and the transdisciplinary part means that I cross disciplines. I do historical research. I am also a trained counselor. So I'm not a psychological astrologer. I'm not a research astrologer. Although I was trained in Hellenistic astrology and I can do a nice Hellenistic workup, I'm not a traditional astrologer. Mainly also because to me, tradition is actually the astrology you do with your face. So I call like visual, like going out this morning when I was looking at Saturn and Venus rising over the New River mists, that's traditional astrology to me. Classical astrology would be like the Hellenistic. And so transdisciplinary is just a way of saying like I do it all kind of. The only thing I really don't do is I'm not a an orary practitioner. And that's not that it's not for any reason really other than there's plenty of people doing it. So I just don't, I haven't really, but other than that, there's not a lot in the astrology world that I haven't done. And so that's what the transdiscipline, it means I've been around the block a few
To
times.
each according to their abilities. And what about astrocartography? Did you have a little period where you became obsessed with locality?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, man. I have done that since about 2010 now. So 15 years of and getting up early, super early, oh dark 30, getting dressed, getting in the truck, driving to these locations, hiking up the side of a mountain in the cold and the dark. I've put in a lot of time to try to share these experiences of like, oh, there's a comet in the sky right now, and not everybody is going to be able to see that. And I want people because to me, the soul of astrology is in the sky. And that just seems so obvious. And so I want to encourage people
In the
to,
sky, not in
yeah,
looking at stellarium on your
exactly,
laptop screen. We're going to get there. Now, what's all
exactly.
this about a dream initiation that happened in
Right. So I
1993?
became an astrologer through a dream. I had begun studying tarot and practicing tarot. I had been homeless by on design, by on purpose for several years.
Were you
And I
living
came
in your
back.
car or in your truck?
No, I was a leather tramp, bro. I wasn't a rubber tramp. I was a leather tramp. I was hitchhiking around for several years. So yeah, some rubber tramping, but not my rubber. Not yet, anyway. And I got back to the East Coast and I got settled for the first time in several years, and I began to have a series of really vivid dreams. And in the final one, I'm lying on my back in a field of green grass, and I'm looking up at the sun, and I can look right at it. You know, it's not hurting my eyes, it's not blinding me, and I'm like, wow. So I'm checking it out, and in the midst of the solar disk, there was the symbol for Venus, and I just was blown away by that, and I knew that there was like this was a message from who, what, I don't know, But A, I know that I trust this more than any academic curriculum, which is how I became homeless. I just kind of left school and went out to see the world. And so I knew instinctively that I trusted this, and I knew instinctively that it had to mean something. And so one of my trips to the used bookstore on Fridays, if I had an extra $5, I'd go to the used bookstore, and I asked the guy, is there any way for me to know when Venus and the sun were together in the sky? And he goes, yeah, yeah. And he shows me this old blue Rosicrucian ephemeris, and it was 100 year. One of the, you ever seen one of those? The
Yep.
really thick ones.
With
So,
the
okay.
declination on every
Yep.
page. Love it. Yeah.
So I got that and I went home and I started to decipher it. And I found, okay, so this means the sun was here. So this means the Venus was here. Holy shit. On the night that I had that dream, there was an inferior conjunction of the sun and Venus. And so I was literally in my dream seeing the sky, which you actually can't see a conjunction of Venus and the sun unless it's a transit of Venus. And even then, only with
Across the surface of the sun.
a
Yeah.
filter, right? Or whatever. And so yeah, it kind of did involve some melatonin. And yes, I'm quite sure that Hermes was on hand. And yeah, I did. It's not that I cast the chart for the dream. I kind of, I didn't, know like what time of night that it had. I didn't note the time when I got up. So it wasn't that so much that I cast the chart. It was that well, I cast sort of like what you might call the whole sign chart. Like I just
Right.
found out, and that was it for me. I was hooked, and so for the next several years, I was living in a house with no electricity, by the way. So and just eating what I grew and whatever, and so I would sit with a candle at night flipping through the pages of that ephemeris trying to figure out like what the hell I had got
So
myself
you were like
into.
one of Anne Rice's vampires, in Interview with the Vampire, the first book, right? The candles burning, the book stacked everywhere, right?
Yep.
Yep, yep.
Yep.
How great. Now, I'm becoming afraid I didn't press record, so we're going to check in a second to make sure.
I'm pretty
So,
sure I remember something about a recording.
okay, okay, then maybe we'll have faith.
I
Now let's
see a
talk.
I see a red thing saying recording. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, because I'm
Yeah.
not seeing it, but that's because I am looking at my PowerPoint. So I'm thinking you were into alchemy before you were into astrology, but I don't know why I think that.
Yeah. No, it's true. I started brewing beer in college because I was poor and I wanted to get drunk for cheap. And so I got a book about it and stuff, and the first batch was awful, dude, because I I knew it was like four ingredients, right? So you got water, you got barley, you got um, hops, and you've got yeast. Well,
Yeast. Yeah,
the
yeah.
yeast that I put in there was bread yeast.
Oh no.
I didn't make Yeah, it was absolutely awful. But once I figured out, no, 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 you need brewer's yeast, I started making some pretty decent stuff. It was definitely good enough to get drunk on. And
And
my
you were a
friends,
pioneer. Like what year was this? This is
dude,
before
this
the
was
whole
in the
brewing
80s.
industry. Right. This is you were ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I thought the whole thing was over in the 90s. By the time the 90s rolled around, I had gotten really good. I We had a brewing club um in the place where I lived, and I was sitting around with a friend of mine who was part of the brewing club, and we were discussing, well, what we would name our brewery if we founded a brewery and stuff. And I remember going away from that and thinking to myself, dude, stop being such a stupid dreamer. Like this whole scene, this whole fad of like microbrewing, it's so over. Like people are gonna move on to the next. That was like the biggest whiff of my like because dude, I made some raspberry stout. I had this huge hedge of raspberries in my yard at the time, and I just instinctively I love dark beer. So I had a nice stout that I was preparing, and I was like, let's throw some raspberries in there. And I took this to
And
the
we want
beer
to say
club.
organic,
Oh,
non-GMO,
they were wild.
pesticide-free raspberries,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Strawberries. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And the guys at the brew club I marinated a piece of venison in this raspberry stout and brought it. The guys at the brew club were literally fighting over the last piece of venison, man. And now, if you go to the store and you try to buy a pint of like raspberry stout, like it's 15, $20, you know?
Wow.
So I kick myself to this day sometimes about that because yeah, no,
Well, I want to suggest you start doing kombucha and see how alchemical you can get with that, for
yeah, I
purely,
never had a lot of taste for kombucha. I don't know why. Yeah, but
well, most
yeah,
commercial, most
there's a lot of
commercial
things.
is
There's a
not
lot of things
great.
like sauerkraut. That's alchemy,
Yep.
right?
Do you make that?
A
Okay,
little bit.
I gotta get back to the workshop. Wait, and the topic.
Okay.
But so we know you've given us a good sense of your fulfilling yet itinerant life before you found astrology.
Yeah.
Um, I'm under the impression now, I met a fellow named Jeffrey Sayer Close many, many years ago, and he ended up buying a software program from Cable McCutcheon, who was his mentor, and sadly died quite young. I
Yeah.
think that now. 20
Yeah.
years ago, I didn't think that age was young.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure you were involved in the Intrepid software development,
Yep.
along with Adam Gainsberg and Julene, whose last name I
Lewis.
Lewis. Okay.
Yeah.
And I feel like the three of you were working together on naked eye astronomy, but also on taking what you had learned from Hellenistic astrology and helping to develop and improve the Intrepid program. Am I right here?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I met Jeffrey way back actually when I first got started. I had just gotten a website. So when I first got started as a full-time astrologer, so I was still working as a mental health counselor up until about 2006. And so I was part-timing it, and then in 2006 I decided that's it. Like I got laid off twice and I just thought this is for a reason. So I met Jeff in the process of getting my website going, and I knew that he was onto some really profound stuff, and I love the software, but I just didn't. It's like that you love somebody, but you have no idea what the hell they're doing in your life. It was like that. And so I stayed friends with him for a while. And then at some point, my buddy Adam, who I met at Project Hindsight, actually, we were both there my second time at Project Hindsight
Were you
um,
there? Were you there when I was there? Were you there for the
in the 90s.
in no, I was there, I think, in the early 2000s, but Maria Matus was there. Who else was there? Robert Corey left.
I was
Um,
there just after that. So I was there in the 90s, in the
yeah.
middle 90s. Um, and I was there. I lived in Berkeley Springs
Oh my
for like a
God.
year. Yeah, man.
So
Yeah.
did you know Bob and Ellen in Berkeley Springs?
100%.
How cool.
I slept on the floor in their house. I
That
knew
was supposed to be the coolest community.
dude, we used to go down to Terry's and have a great time and sit on his back porch and yeah,
So
um
you really go way back with the Hellenistic. You didn't
yeah,
just
man, I was
learn
there
it.
from the very beginning, but
Right.
I never was this person. Like transdisciplinary really is who I am. Like I wasn't going to get caught up in like being that. You know, like Bob Dylan says, if he who is not being busy being born is busy dying, and I wasn't gonna let that happen. So I went on and had many other adventures, and then in 2007, Michael Earlywine was there and I knew Michael Earlywine because I had took this whole adventure into heliocentric astrology, and then somebody says to me, Gary, I think what you're doing is a lot like what Michael Earlywine. Maybe you should talk to him. Turns out he had already done everything I thought I had discovered. So, but anyway, Michael invited me to back to Project Hindsight, is where I met Adam. And Adam's telling me, yeah, I want to get some software. And I'm like, okay, well, I know one software guy and he's a really good guy. So let me introduce you. So Adam and Jeff got introduced. and they hit it off really well. And Jeff developed this module for Intrepid that's called Sky Engine, where we
Right.
began, yeah, and we got Daniel Gemario, who's like sort of the original pioneer of the visual astrology back in the 90s. Um,
Read the screen. I was going to ask you about him just
yeah,
for unrelated reasons. That's great. Yeah.
yeah. So we got Daniel involved, and we had like different versions of like, because everybody does it a little bit different. Daniel has his
Yep.
own way of doing the Mars cycle, and Adam and I do it differently. So, but we figured let's program everybody's version in there, and people can just pick. And so that was, and unfortunately, like I remember, it's really crazy, man. In UAC 2012
In New
in New
Orleans,
Orleans,
right?
yeah,
That's
like
my favorite UAC. Yeah.
one of my favorites too, man. I was involved in everything. I was up on the roof with my friends hanging out. That was such a good time. And on the way to the airport, I'm riding with two of my very closest friends, Jeff Close and Kelly Lee Phipps, riding. And it
Yep.
turns out that was the last time I saw both of those cats, man.
Yeah.
I
And
had no idea.
I think did they both die of cancer?
No, Jeff, I think was his heart.
Okay, you're right. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So you just never know, man, and I wake up every freaking morning, bro. The first thing that I'm saying is thank you, God, for another day. I kid you not, man, and I mean that from
No,
the bottom of
that's
my
the
heart.
best way to wake up. Now, a lot of people from our group, the NCGR chapter you're doing this workshop for in Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and all of Southern Florida, went to a conference in the Bahamas that I believe you,
Yeah,
Adam, and Julene
yeah,
put on. And I would have been there if I hadn't been paying off medical bills. All right. But it
yeah.
was supposedly so much fun. And when
We
was
had
that?
a blast, man. There was a storm that almost like derailed us, but we made it. The storm blew over, and we got to see Venus and Mars with the moon, right there over the water. It was incredible. And I did a whole thing on the Venus Mars cycle for people, and that was my first standing ovation. I remember so clearly.
Really?
Yeah, people loved it, and it was a lot of fun. And then we did two more sky astrology conferences, one in 2018, we in Colorado. We were going to do one in 2021, but then COVID and everything. But we finally got that done last year in actually in Tybee Island, Georgia. Um, but yeah, this work with the retrograde loops came out of that because after Adam and I had been working on these cycles and stuff for a while, he shared with me about these loops, and he's like, okay, so because Adam was the one that first turned me on to the visual cycles, and then and it was at
Was it
hindsight.
through his
Uh,
work with Venus and Mars that Adam turned you on
yeah,
to it? Yeah.
with Venus in particular. And so he's like, okay, so now that you got, a hang of the synodic cycles, let me really fry your brain. Check out these loops that they do and what the WTF is going on with this. So dude, I got out my drafting tools, drew these things. And you had asked in the previous slide about Lee Lehman. She does play a part in this. It's
Oh,
it's
good.
really wild. Um,
Was she helping get a grasp, a
Yeah,
grip
she
on
was
the
really
loops?
key
Yeah.
because I had drawn these loops, and about the time that I thought I understood them, I said, "Okay, a typical Virgo moon kind of thing. Okay, I've been looking at like 100 years, drawing them. Figure, okay, I think I got it. Let me go back another 100 years and just make sure." And then at that time, things change, and I'm going, "What the hell? How am I ever going to understand this?" And so in the middle of that, Lee and Maggie were there in Asheville, right? And they were founding members of the Asheville Friends of Astrology with me and Kelly Lee. and they
And
needed.
Deborah Hellman was part of that too?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right.
Yep. And who else? Kim Manini was. She had connections to Florida too. Did you know Kim?
No, but
Yeah.
Deborah was like almost an honorary Floridian because of her
Yeah, that's right.
connections with Deborah Mills and Jeffrey Brock.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they needed something moved, and I had a pickup truck, and they were like, "Oh, you can do it. Okay, great. Well,
Everybody
since
wants
you're,
to be your friend when you have
since
a
you're
pickup
yeah,
truck.
you know what I'm saying." My father told me that early in my life when I was buying my first vehicle, and he was dead right. Um, but yeah, so they were like, "Well, since you're coming all this way, we'll fix dinner, and you can stay a while and everything." And so we're sitting there at the dinner table. And there's, a silence or whatever. And Lee goes, I remember. There's a book I want to show you. And she goes and gets the book and she's like, there's some stuff in there about synodic cycles, but there's this other thing in the back that I think you might like even more.
Was it the
And
Tables of Planetary Phenomenon by Michelson, or what was
no,
it?
nope.
No.
It was this book called Tantra Vidya by Oscar Marcel Hinza, this crazy German guy. And she told me this story about this guy. He sounds like a real like eccentric, and I mean that in a loving, like wonderfully eccentric person. And I looked in the back, and he had all these pictures of these loops,
Were
and
they
I
like
was
mandalas or sort of planetary
um
mandalas? No, just loops.
no, literally like the different shapes that I had been drawing with my drafting tools and everything of the shapes that the planets make when you draw them out with longitude and latitude. There's
Amazing.
these looping shapes, but there's all kinds of them. And I was like, oh my, I was literally my think, that head exploding emoji, like, and I
Yep.
was like, can I please borrow it? And then I had to get it translated because it's in German.
How old is this book?
It's not that old. He's a contemporary
Does he
guy.
have a software program? I may have heard of this guy.
I'm not sure. He
Yeah.
he he was doing visual astrology stuff. He had a group of women that he was doing some kind of ceremonial visual astrology work. I remember her telling me that. And so I got the book from Lee, got it translated, and well, I got the part that I needed translated, and he was saying, you have to draw the loops. And I'm like, yes, I've been drawing them. And he said something about you'll think there's seven of them, but there's really eight. And I was like, okay, so that's all and so in making eight of them, it something clicked where I was like, because what happened was with the Venus loops, there was one loop which is literally like a Z shape, and it was going from below the ecliptic, and then it was stopping and going up across the ecliptic, and then back parallel to the ecliptic. It's like a Z shape.
Hmm.
What happened and I said, okay, and then there's five of them because Venus has five different retrogrades at any given time. And what happened when I went back the extra 100 years, now the Z shape, instead of going up, was going down. And I was like, okay, wait a second. If there's eight of them, maybe there's one up Z and one down Z, right? Which is two. And then there's three above and three below. And maybe this is all has to do with the nodes of the planet somehow. And turns out, lo and behold, that's what it was. Like basically the upward Z is when Venus is crossing her north node. The downward Z is when she's crossing her south node. And it turns out not only is it true for Venus, it's true for the rest of the planets. So for instance, during the pandemic, and I gave this talk that I'm going to give to Astrology South Florida. I gave this talk at UAC 18 in Chicago. And I said at UAC 18 in Chicago, the last time that Jupiter did this downward Z at its south node in Capricorn, there was a stock market crash. So does that mean in 2020 there's going to be another stock market crash? Like I gave a forecast. Do you know, dude, it was within one day of the exact contact of Jupiter crossing the ecliptic, the day after, that's when the COVID crash happened.
Amazing. And you're talking the Jupiter crash. Are you talking about 2008, September?
Yeah, there was a crash in
Yep.
2008, and that was Jupiter crossing its south. And then 12 years later, right? There's another, and I said in 2018, it's possible. It was a forecast. It wasn't a prediction.
Right.
I was so, but the forecast came true, and it was literally timed to one day. Now, imagine if I had known what the hell I was doing and I shorted the stock market. You know what I'm saying? I
You
mean,
would have four trucks. Yes.
exactly.
So you're going to teach people at the workshop how to draw the loops, and are you going to also go, people that aren't familiar with planetary nodes, will you be explaining to them what
Yeah.
they are and whether to, so people get very confused because do they do heliocentric nodes? Do they do terrestrial nodes,
Geocentric. Yeah. Yeah.
And then
There's
not all software programs. So you're going to demystify nodes in the workshop, basically.
100%. Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention you'll be putting varied examples from birth charts, political elections, noted economic booms and busts, and sporting contests. Now, are some of the booms and busts you're going to look at, are they international or are they all centered
Well,
around
like
the
for
US?
instance, that was a global bust in,
Right.
in the COVID thing,
Oh
and
boy.
there was Saturn was crossing its node at the same time as Jupiter. That's why that one was so powerful. So yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. And then there's also this plays into the Bitcoin chart. So for people who may be crypto enthusiasts, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So there's just a variety of things. I have an
Awesome.
example when Peyton Manning won his second Super Bowl. There's a really interesting example from that. I'm trying to think what other examples I have. But yeah, it's just I like to throw different things out there because not everybody gives a crap about the stock market or
Right. Or Peyton
Bitcoin.
Manning,
Or
yeah.
exactly. And so you kind of throw a variety of things out there and everybody will get a little taste of something that they like.
So, who was your first astrology teacher?
My first astrology teacher was a guy by the name of Tom Roma, who was
Oh,
a
yeah, I know Tom. Yeah.
Philly guy. Yeah. Sadly, we lost Tom just a couple years
When
back.
did he die?
Um, was it last year? I
I used to get his ephemeris, or he did
Yeah, dude,
he
I
did,
had that.
yeah.
Had that annual book that he did by my side at my left hand for 20 some years, man. Every day I was consulting that thing
You
and
know what my replacement now is for all the Celestial Influences by Maynard is I do Honeycomb Collective.
yeah, the
Right?
honeycomb's pretty good. I
Yeah.
got the honeycomb too. Yeah.
So
Yep.
you should tell the folks at the lecture about that.
All
Um,
right.
who are some of your favorite current practitioners of the round art, which is a synonym for astrology?
Some of my favorite current people.
They they could be astrologians. They don't have to be, which is the word Lily and Al H. Morrison, who we'll be getting to,
Yeah.
used to use for people that are really preoccupied with the theory and philosophy of astrology, just not, you know, what to charge for a reading.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I got in touch with a guy by the name of John Michael Greer, who was a noted
Yes,
esotericist more than anything. And I did a review. I did a review of his book. And
the Twilight of Pluto.
yep.
Yep.
And that was really eye-opening for me to talk with somebody. And he literally said, I decided to develop astrology last because it seemed like the hardest one. And so for those people who may be thinking about branching out into some of these other things, here's a guy who's one of the most well-known esotericists in the world, really, published many, many, many books on
He has written
Kabbalah and
so many books. Yes.
and he's saying you've already got the hard part. So if you're thinking about branching out in any of this stuff, don't be shy because, um, but that's not necessarily a favorite of mine. It's just one that's coming to mind of the one of
Yep.
the people
Well,
that I've been working with
I
recently.
program for the Astrological Society of Kentucky, as you know, and John is going to be our December speaker, so you should come to that.
Ah, awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I
Well,
need to get back to Kentucky. It's been a while since I've been there myself.
Well, I probably am going to have you be one of the summer speakers
Awesome.
before I have to step down.
Awesome.
And
That sounds wonderful.
I've even jotted down some titles for you. So I'm going to get back to your book now, which first I just want to congratulate you. We're going to
Thank
talk a
you,
little
man.
bit about what Al H. Morrison used to say about the inferior and superior conjunctions of Mercury and Venus. But I want to say no one has ever explained it better or more clearly in any astrology text I've ever seen. So I just want to say to
Wow, that's cool, man.
the folks watching this, if you think of yourself as a serious astrologer or an frivolous astrologian, you don't, you know, it's your call. And of course, there's no such thing as a frivolous astrologian, really,
No.
but because they are philosopher kings of the sky. But I would tell you, you must get this book, which I think it came from a small press. I see the fingerprints of editor Jen Zart all over this book, right? And it's on great paper, and it's just an attractive, wonderful book, but you need to read what's in it. And
Thank you, man.
we're
Yeah,
gonna,
it's interesting. That's what Chris Rinstrom said too. He did a review and he said it was the first time he heard somebody explain that where his eyes didn't glaze over. And I was like, nice.
and then after reading the first few chapters of your book, I went back to reread what Al Morrison said in a very cryptic, telegrammatic manner, and I suddenly got it. So
Nice. Nice.
you talk about the collective currents
Yes.
of the Mercury year,
Yep.
and I think I'm quoting you now. The collective currents of the Mercury year serve to contain, shape, and define the individual and their efforts. At the same time, the individual currents, I'm saying the individual currents of the Mercury year, maybe I should read from the actual text, also informs and ultimately serves as a vehicle through which these collective tides may be expressed.
Yeah.
So
So
what you're
the idea is that you were born at a single moment in time. So you have a birth chart and everybody knows their birth chart, that's in the astrology. And it's always, no matter what talk I give, the first question or one of the main questions I'll always hear, well, what does it have to do with my chart? Right. So it's all, yes, but time is not static. Time flows. And so there was what so that chart, that snapshot of time that you identify with, it came into being from somewhere and it continued to flow to another place. And so the Mercury retrogrades before and after your birth can be used as a kind of bookend, as a container within which this central moment can be framed. So we're opening up to it's kind of like secondary progressions where a day equals a year, right? There's a bigger time frame than this moment. And and so and because the year you were born, what's really interesting is the thing that you have in common, for instance, with all the people you graduated high school with, other than outer planet placements, the thing that you have in common with everyone you graduated high school with is that the Mercury retrogrades were happening in a particular element that year.
before and after your birth,
Yeah, before and
containing the
after your
birth
birth.
moment. Yes.
Yeah, there was a particular element that the retrogrades were happening in, one of the four elements. And so what I mean by that is this element is informing your chart, but you as an individual are expressing that in an absolute unique way. And so you're informing the mysteries of that element at the same time. So it's a there's a correspondence above and below. The above the element is informing you, and you're expressing that in your own unique
The
human
triplicity, the
fashion. Yeah.
triplicity element, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, I I love how you reframe that hermetic maxim within your book, and I wondered if you later go on to talk about the other great maxim, as within, so without, right? So
We talk about like what the what the what the Emerald Tablet actually says is that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below. And how it happened is I was going out and doing this astrophotography, trying to inspire people to get out and actually be with the sky,
Yep.
which is our oldest tradition. And Mercury is the hardest planet to catch. In fact, some people theorize that the greatest astronomer of since whenever, Nikolai Copernicus, never saw Mercury with his eyes because he lived in a valley that was foggy, kind of like where I live, but I happen to live on a hill. And he may have never laid eyes on Mercury. It's not easy to see. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do the hard one. It's like I'm not kind of I told John Michael Greer when he said, yeah, I'd save the hardest one for last. I was like, dude, I'm so opposite of that. Like, give me the hardest one first every time. So I started like getting, I realized pretty quickly you can only see Mercury in the months where it's not near the sun, right? It's got to be is what we call greatest elongation.
We're
It's got
talking
to be,
about liminal viewing, right?
yeah,
Early morning and twilight, right?
yep, that's
Yep.
right. And so what happened was I got into this rhythm of like, okay, this month it's time to chase Mercury with my camera, right? And then this month, well, I'm not going to be able to see Mercury, so I'm chasing Mercury at my desk, reading, doing notes, comparing my experiences, and so on. And so it was in one of these times where I was comparing the experience that I had a copy of the Emerald Tablet and it stayed pretty much on my desk, kind of like Tom Roma's, planner used to. It had a spot. It had its own spot, and I was
Was
like,
it the Doreal version by any chance?
no, it was a version that I got from a guy in Asheville that I had been hanging out with, Jim Rogers. He's a retired psychiatrist, and he had been involved in alchemy, the Alchemy Guild or something, and it's basically like just a Latin version translated.
Great.
And it was
Literal
talking about,
translation.
yeah, it was talking about, this idea again, that which is above corresponds to that which is below, and that which is below corresponds to that. And it just hit me like, what if that's literal? It was kind of like
Yeah,
the
you're
dream.
describing a circuit basically. Right.
Exactly.
That goes round and an eternal circuit
Exactly. And I was
and
like, what?
internal.
Yeah, what if this is actually literal? Like my dream was. It was literally showing me there was a conjunction of Venus and the sun in the sky. And I was like, what if that's literal? Nah, it couldn't be. But what if it is? Well, okay, well, let's look. And what I found is that the times when Mercury was above the horizon where I was chasing him with the camera, what we call maximum elongation, and the times where it was invisible below the horizon during the conjunction with the sun, they matched. They were that Mercury forms a triptych. That hence the name of the book, Hermetica Triptycha. Mercury forms three alignments: one in the evening sky, evening elongation; one at and I have a visual for this if
Sure, let me stop sharing for a moment and
yeah,
let you take command, but I'm going to have to um make it so, as Picard would say. Hold on. Okay, allow. Oh yeah, there you go. You got it.
awesome. All right, so yeah, this and
There
so
it is.
so there's this event that happens in the evening sky. Mercury is very high and bright. And then there's this event that happens below, so above the horizon. Then there's this event that happens below the threshold of visibility, the conjunction with the sun. And then there's the morning elongation that happens. And there are three very different events, but they all happen around the same zodiacal degrees. And I was like, holy crap, man. And it happened, and every single time it happens that way.
So in
So
this is you see the three, the one, and the two, are these the zodiacal degrees, or you're just talking about the order?
No, this is the order. Yeah. So the
Okay.
zodiacal degrees will be, like, 3 or 4 degrees apart
Right, right. No, so
within.
it's
So it's
amazing. I want to tell you, for years and years, I tried to find some good information on greatest eastern and western elongation for Mercury and Venus because I knew it must mean something astrologically, and
You can't find
I
it.
I would print it out. I would go to these like astronomer websites, and print out, the dates and the degrees, but no one seemed to have any idea what it might mean astrologically. So I just want to thank you
Yeah,
for
man, you're
putting this
welcome.
in this
And
book,
I
man.
went and I got Jeff to include those in the
Sky Engine.
Sky Engine module, and I went and created an entire ephemeris, which is in the back of the book, and
And
that
it's a
was
great
its.
ephemeris. It's easy to use. I used it within the first 5 minutes of looking at it, and
Thanks,
it
man.
goes up to 2050.
Yeah.
I hate it when ephemerides run out.
Yeah, I
Um,
wanted to make it where like at least I would not be around by the time it ran out anyway.
oh, I think you'll be here still, but
Well,
maybe.
we'll see. But I'll be too damn old to care anyways.
Now, I want to reiterate in my own words what Gary was saying. You're documenting a collective expression and experience of Mercury that we're all having away from the cardinal axis and away from the transpersonal trio. So this is a useful and, unexpected tool because,
Yeah. Imagine
sometimes we're
that.
all
There's a
experiencing when Mercury conjoins Pluto, we're all experiencing it together, but
yeah.
this is mini generational, as you're saying.
Yeah, there's a collective dimension of even of the personal planets,
Yeah,
and that was really eye-opening for me. And of course, we're influencing the collective as much as the collective is influencing us.
exactly.
It goes both ways,
Exactly.
as above, so below, as within, so without. And so yeah, that's the idea there. And it's been incredible. I did a series. Frank Clifford just got hold of the Mountain
Yep.
Astrologers. He's going to be putting that back out again. And I asked him, "Hey, man, are you going to keep the blogs?" Because I wrote a lot of blogs for TMA back. Tim used to do a trade with me where he'd say, "Gary, if you want to run your ad, write a couple blogs for me, and I'll run your ad." And so I had an ad in there for years because I would just write a couple blogs for
Did it
him.
generate much business for you?
Oh yeah,
Good.
definitely. It helped my podcast quite a bit. But so, I was looking on there and I wrote a series of back when the Mercury elemental year, so this triptych of alignments was happening in the air signs. I wrote about that with respect to the cryptocurrency thing that was happening in 2021, and how that was what was also going on when the year Bitcoin came into being. And then every 6.5 to 7 years, and then so Bitcoin came into being during a year where Mercury elemental year was in air. Go figure, right? And then 6.5, 7 years later, Ethereum gets born. And then 6.5, 7 years later, NFTs are booming. And I was like, I think there's a pattern here, and so it's
And spell it
incredible.
out for me. What's the pattern in one sentence or less?
The pattern is air years are a big deal for cryptocurrency, and so
Mhm.
it's like pretty easy to see, um, amongst other things, and you can see this like one of the most vivid examples of that phenomenon was like 2010 when we had like the Arab Spring.
Yep.
That guy set himself on fire. The one guy set himself on fire, which set a whole country on fire, and then an entire region. He literally did that on the day when Mercury retrograde entered Sagittarius from Capricorn at the winter solstice point on the world axis. 29 Sagittarius, there was a conjunction of Mercury with the sun,
Yep.
and the guy set himself on fire and set the world on fire. So the element of fire was being expressed collectively, without a doubt. They literally had these things called days of rage where they would get pissed and demonstrate about this. It was so obvious. This is
And
a
set and
collective
set and set fires and
and that,
yeah.
yeah. And so that's when I really decided, okay, I have to get serious about this because Erin Sullivan had talked about this, but her book, Retrograde Planets, is about all the retrogrades. And so she just had a few pages
Does
about
she
them.
touch on the stuff you're touching on, the elemental year or
She
the
thought she
loops?
talked about the elements. She didn't talk about the above and the below, the hermetic parts. That was my contribution. But as I said, she didn't have room. Like she just had a few pages, and then she
I
had to
think that
cover.
book is still in print,
Oh yeah,
Retrograde
it's a great
Planets.
book, and I'm really happy. Before we lost Aaron, I can't believe that
I know.
yet
Yeah.
another person. Before we lost Aaron, I managed to get her a copy of the book, and she gave me her blessing and thought it was wonderful. And she was really happy that someone took that little bit that she had in there and
And
made a
ran
whole
with it.
other book out of it,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Um,
Norman Lear, the television writer who did All in the Family and Maude
yeah.
and Sanford and Son. The
He did
last
Sanford and
project
Son
he
too. I
did.
did not.
Yep.
Dude, I love Fred Sanford. He used to
I
crack me
think he
up,
did.
dude.
Now you're
Oh my
making me doubt
God.
myself. I think he did. And so he ended up doing one more sitcom that's on Amazon, but his last project he wanted to do was called Guess Who Died?
Oh
Because
geez.
he'd reached the age where everyone would say, "Guess who died?" or "Did
Yeah,
you hear
right.
about?"
Yeah.
And
Oh my
and we're
God.
we're slowly getting there now ourselves. I realized
Right?
it was realism, not comedy. Now, what I want to stop for a moment and ask you, Venus has the greatest eastern elongation and western elongation. So is there something similar going on with Venus in the
There
sky?
is. There is. With
Or
Venus, it's
does
a
the
little
Venus
bit.
star have it covered? Or is there something different than the
It's a
Venus
little
star?
bit different with Venus. Venus has points called the greatest brilliance, which is before, so it's before in the morning, greatest brilliance happens. So you have the inferior conjunction
Yep.
with the sun. 36 days later, we have greatest brilliance. And then 36 days later, we have greatest elongation. So the greatest brilliance in the evening, we have 36 days before the conjunction, we have greatest brilliance in the evening. 36 days before that, we have greatest elongation. So the greatest brilliance, evening and morning, line up with the interior conjunction every time.
And have you found astrological significance to that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Is that the
basically,
next book? Is that the next book?
could be.
All right. Now,
It easily could be. I mean,
and we don't have to have our little decan note plucked. It's 36, but that's a whole separate thing. So many people are doing great and pioneering work with
there's a
decans
really
now.
interesting thing with the Venus star and the decans, but I'm not going to get into it
No,
because
no,
I
we have
know
too much else
there's
to cover. I know
not
that
just that, but I
Christine,
know there's a girl who wants to write a book on it, and so I'm going to let her do it. You know what
right?
I'm
Well,
saying? Yeah.
check out what one of Revelor's authors is doing. So Cameron Cassidy, uh, see, he's coming out with a book sometime in the next few months that you'll
On
find really,
decans.
yep,
Oh, cool.
The
Excellent.
Egyptian stream.
Okay.
Um, so I think Christine, you're just going to have to edit this interview down. We're not stopping. We have too much to cover. Better too much than too little, Christine. That's the president of the
All
NCGR.
right. It
Um,
works for me. That tends to be my jam.
exactly.
More is betterer.
Now, I'm going to read another passage just to reinforce in people's minds what's so important about this Hermetica triptych. And that just means three Hermes, right? That's the
Yeah, a triptych is something that happens in three parts. Yep.
Is that
So,
another way of saying the thrice great Hermes Trismegistus?
yeah,
Okay.
except it's an object. Like in this case, there's a triptych of alignments. So Hermes thrice great was he was thrice great for a few reasons. He was thrice
So
great
Hermes,
because it's three gods wrapped in one, and because three civilization,
and Nabu, right?
three cultures wrapped
Yeah.
in one, and he was thrice great because he was the master, he was the inventor of the three hermetic arts. So there's the thrice, in this case, the triptych is these three alignments that are what we would call a differentiated
Right.
unity.
Right.
There's
The
three
peak,
different,
the peak, the peak, and the valley. Yes.
yeah.
And this seems to also bring to mind some of the work Adam was doing with Sky Engine.
Yeah, I mean, Adam was, my introduction of Adam and Jeffrey was the reason why I was able to make those ephemerides because there is a thing if anybody wants, and because unfortunately it's a long story, but SkyEngine is not available commercially. So if
Isn't
anybody
that
wants to,
because of Windows and everything? And
yeah, it's just trying to do tech support for software is not Adam's jam. It's essentially,
so can you still run it on a legacy computer or will it
yeah,
run on
I'm
Windows
I'm
10?
still running it. It's just Adam has chosen not to
Yeah.
spend his time doing tech support.
So you can still get a copy of Sky Engine. You'll have to explain that at the workshop.
It's not for
So,
sale though. That's what I'm
okay.
saying. It's not commercially available.
It has to be bartered or gifted. You have
Look,
to ask
if
for
you
it
if
when
you
Venus
want
is
to finagle
brilliant.
one out of Adam, like however you manage that is on you.
I
But
had it. I had it, but that computer died,
so talk to him. He
Yeah.
might be able to get you
I
help
will.
you out, depending on whatever he's got going on. But if people want to work with the elongations of Mercury, just type in Mercury Chasers Calculator. Mercury Chaser Calculator into a search engine. There's an old Formulab website, and you can and it runs off the calculator in your own computer.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Good. So it's possible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this
it's
is this is
doable.
the paragraph you wrote that I felt summed it up similarly but simply. Just as all wines bottled by a vintner in a particular calendar year share the same general characteristics, similarly, the Mercury elemental year defines the vintage of your image making, information processing, and spiritual transformation faculties, a vintage which you share with a good many other souls born during your year.
Yeah, everyone you graduated high school with, that's the thing that you share.
Yeah.
Beyond, having Pluto and Virgo or, whatever. That's another it's kind and so yeah, there's this vintage. And what's really wild about that is that it's a vintage that comes back every 6.5, 7 years. That element will repeat. And then what happens is there's 12 of those 6.5, 7 year returns over the course of a lifetime. And so if we think about like wine, for instance, if we were to when you take wine and you distill it, do you know what you get? Cognac,
I didn't know that
yeah,
actually.
yeah, yeah. That's what you get so each time you take that raw wine there was when we were walking the Camino over in Spain, there was this guy that we stopped to get some Orujo from. Orujo is like kind of like grain alcohol. It's like really high test stuff. And he was making Arujo from wine, and he was distilling the wine and making like this pure spirit. And so the idea from the last chapter of the book is that each time this element returns, it's like getting the nature of that impression. So in my case, I was born during an air year. So this idea of that the element of air is informing my image making, you know,
What
I
do you
just
mean by
got done
image making for people that might not know what you mean watching this?
symbols, like
Okay.
symbols are images of something, right? So like just this morning I was out looking at the Venus Saturn conjunction and I was like, oh my God, I got to make a symbol for what I saw. So I came in and I took the Venus glyph, and then and then in the middle I put the Aries glyph, and then below Saturn. So I made an image, a symbol of what I saw in the sky, right? And so image making is
And would
like
that also include talismans, astrological
100%.
talismans?
They were called
Okay.
images. There's a book
Yeah.
called On Images, and what it means is this is a book of talisman making. Yeah, 100%. And so yeah, like that every time that year repeats, it's like that wine is getting distilled and it becomes a little more clear, and you become a little more clear about why you were born with this element and what your personal contribution is to this element, and it's wild. That chapter actually, as far as the feedback that I've gotten from folks, well, one person said that the introduction was the best damn introduction they've ever read, which I thought was pretty cool. So I've gotten feedbacks about other, but
It's a very poetic introduction.
thanks, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was very inspired, but that last part where it's basically what I did is I took these 12 returns and I made it into like a developmental, so developmental psychology, like different parts of your life, you're a different person. You don't step into the same river twice. So each time we step into this elemental stream of, for me it's air, for someone else it might be water or fire or earth, but each time you step into that stream, you're a different person. And the stream is a different stream. And so you're refining your contribution to that consciousness of that element a little bit more. You're doing the alchemy of refining that, of distilling that down, making that liquor, making it from alcohol, from wine into cognac, and then eventually into like this arujo, this clear liquor of the soul, and I've described like what that might look like at each one of these returns, and people have, taken quotes and put on social media like what I said about that particular part of their life, and they're like, "Holy shit, this is exactly what I'm going through right now." And that, people, you know, before I wrote this book, I would I would have liked to have said that when I made that connection between the above and the below and the alignments, I was hoping that I could say that I was like channeling Hermes, right? But when that chapter came through me, I knew without a doubt, because I was imagining how to do it. Okay, there's 12, there's 12 signs, there's 12 alchemical operations, there's this, and I use this thing called squaring the circle ultimately as a
I saw
structure.
that illustration. I didn't read
When
that
when
chapter
I
yet. Yeah.
when I found the structure for that chapter poured out of me like nothing I've ever written before, and that's when I knew, hell yeah, bro, you are definitely channeling the spirit of Hermes. and
Amazing.
and that chapter, people feel it, like they are literally just going, holy shit, this is exactly what I'm going through in my life right now. This is me becoming the next version of me,
Yeah.
and it's amazing, man.
Mercurial development. By the way, I wanted to ask you, do you ever work with asteroid Hermes, who I
Oh
love
yeah.
to put in with Mercury
Oh
and
yeah.
a few other
Yeah.
asteroids?
Yeah, the asteroids, it's a really curious thing because I mean, there's so many of them. I remember when I was living in Asheville, of course, it's Beer Town, USA. And I used to hang out in the breweries during the middle of the day. Well, and I'd be doing some work and drinking a couple beers, happy hour, whatever. And then the people would see me and they'd be like asking, what are you doing or whatever. And so I got to looking at people's charts, and they're working in the beer industry. So I put
Asteroid beer.
in their chart. Now, this is named for a guy whose name was Beer, so it shouldn't work. And yet, dude, every
I
single
know.
time. And if you look at like Adolphus Bush, his chart, like the granddaddy of beer in the USA.
Yeah.
Oh, check it out. Sun, trine Uranus. So Sun, identity, Uranus, the planet of industrial, like technology. Grand trine, Sun, Uranus, beer. That's
He
who he
put,
was.
and did he invent some breakthrough beer
Oh,
brewing technology? It sounds
yeah,
like he would have.
100%. He
That
was the first like mass producer of lager in the US, one of the first.
asteroids are very malleable,
It's
yet
incredible, man.
concrete. Like you can use the same asteroid for Jim Morrison, asteroid Morrison, and Al H. Morrison, or the
There's
Morrison it was actually named for, the astronomer that, invented the field of astrobiology. So you have
yeah,
to work it though, and you have
there's
to suspend disbelief. It's true.
It does 100%. There's a lot of and Demetra has shown like there's sort of categories.
Oh yeah,
And so what I've done is like, for instance, when I do my magical elections every month, if I'm doing like a wealth election, I have like,
Abundantia.
but you
Yeah.
100% Felicitas.
And oh my God, there's a Charles Jane hypothetical planet you might want to
There's
work
a
with.
there's
I want
a
to encourage you to explore the work of Martha Lang Westcott
yeah,
that is not as widely known as it should be because she chose to publish her own books, and
right.
it's
Yeah,
just
she was
great.
kind of doing
It's
it
great
before
work.
Demetra got a hold of it.
Well, they were doing it very differently, and Demetra has brought in this extraordinary mythic signature. But if someone's not feeling well, I want Martha's medical asteroids, at my beck and
Mhm.
call.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go over a few more points with you,
All right.
talk a little bit about Al Morrison, and then we'll draw this to a close. And
All right.
hopefully, the person that's editing the video won't be tearing their hair out. I like how you ponder and delineate the house containing the prenatal inferior conjunction of Sun and Mercury as the house wherein the native will feel restless and instinctively drawn to unconventional expressions that run counter to established conditions and the status quo. It's it's such an interesting concept, and then it it reinforces the 20 this actually reinforces the 20th century idea of prenatal eclipses. The houses of your natal chart, doesn't matter what house system you use, but I probably use Placidus.
I'm using
uh,
whole signs.
right, I
Yeah,
knew
but yeah,
that. I
yeah.
knew that. But the houses that contain the prenatal eclipses are the growing houses throughout your lifetime. They'll become more prominent. And as I was reading what you were saying about the houses that the prenatal inferior conjunction of Sun and Mercury, both prenatal and postnatal, it really resonated with me.
Yeah, so for instance, I was born with Aquarius rising, okay? I have Mercury in my chart, in my, snapshot chart, April 10, 1968, Aquarius rising, Mercury's in Aries in the third whole sign house, right? But the Mercury retrograde before I was born was in Aquarius. So first house. So let's talk about what I just said.
So you
That
have
house,
159 as a signature, is what you're telling me?
yep, one
Yep.
and five was the prenatal and the postnatal. So house
You'll
one.
learn what that means, maybe.
House
Maybe. Are you
house
going to go into
one.
that at the workshop or no?
We
Probably
could
not.
we would have to do another workshop for that one.
Right. It's in the
But
book. It's okay.
it's in the book and I can do that workshop for you guys, no problem. Anytime you like.
Yeah.
Maybe next year. But it's a workshop that I do all the time because the Mercury elemental year changes every year, and so it's kind of one that we can always keep doing. So, so think about what I said. There's counter-cultural currents in that house. So let's look, for instance, first house, persona, how I present myself to the world. I was one of the first people who had an astrology podcast.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Me and Kelly Lee, I was on me and Kelly Lee met up in Asheville, and he was the first person to have an astrology podcast. And I was on his show. And then one of my students said, well, you should have a podcast. And I was like, I have no idea how to do that. And she said, I'll do it all for you. What are you going to say? Only thing to say is yes. So I became an astrology podcaster. I was one. So that my personal identity, how I present myself to the world, there was a new way of being, and now everybody's got a freaking podcast. You know what I'm saying?
I
But
do know what you're saying.
so
It
there's
you can't keep up with all the podcasts, with all the
it's incredible, man. You
yeah.
have to kind of
And
just
everyone wants you to be a Patreon of their podcast, right? So,
yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God.
And that's also Michael Luton taught me how to. I was running my own Patreon, my own version of Patreon before Patreon existed because Michael Luton taught me that.
Cool.
Um, I remember going back to this Al Morrison thing, this idea about the inferior conjunction and the superior conjunction. By secondary progression, no matter it's assuming you live to be at least 56 years old, which is half of 118, which
Hmm.
is the average length of the Mercury synodic cycle. At some point in time, by secondary progression, your Mercury will switch from being morning star to evening star. And I read somewhere that I'm trying to think of his name, the Mark Edmund Jones.
Okay.
He used to find when that date happened, and when he first met people, in order to get their attention, he would ask them the very first thing off the bat, what happened in your life at this time? Because it's a crucial turning point. And I was talking about this in New York. Michael Luton invited me to come up, and at the time, I was a Venus guy. I told him I wanted to talk about Venus. He's like, "No, no, no. There's a few of the girls are going to be doing that one. You got to do something else." And so I knew that the Mercury synodic cycle was kind of like a mini version of the Venus cycle, because they're both inferior planets. So I was, okay, I'll do Mercury. So I was talking about this idea of the transition from morning to evening happening at some point in your life, and I saw his eyes get big, and he went and he got an ephemeris off his shelf, and he's a bit in the back of the room, and then his eyes got really big, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, did I say something wrong or right? I'm not. You never really know with Michael, and
True.
and I was like, okay, so afterwards, he's like, Gary, you are the first person to explain this event in my life that happened that's always been so profound that I've never had any astrology technique that honed in on why it was then until you today. You nailed something, and that's why Mark Edmund Jones used to, before he would do anything, because people, oh, astrology, their eyes would glaze over. But he would grab their attention with this technique, and then he would and so essentially, now think about this. What was he using? He was using the inferior conjunction after their birth. The postnatal inferior conjunction is when it changes from morning to evening. You see, that's what he was doing, and he was finding this by progression, and he was getting their attention so that then he could look at other stuff. But it's that profound of a switch when this planet changes from morning sky to evening sky, the shift in consciousness is so obvious and undeniable that it would get people to listen to him so that he could then take them other places.
Did he write? Did Mark Edmund Jones write about this anyplace?
I think he did.
Why don't you
I
have a
can't,
look for that? Not now, but yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
This is amazing. And Michael, Michael Ludin was no pushover, right?
No, sir. No,
No.
sir.
What about how is there any place for Mercury stations besides the obvious? Have you
Well, the stations, um, visually, when Mercury is stationing, that's when Mercury is appearing at the horizon. In fact, Mercury now this is wild. Do you know the myth, the Hermetic hymn of Hermes? Do you know what happens?
is
The
that
first
is that when baby Hermes steals the cattle of the sun?
the first day he's born, he jumps out of the cradle and steals his brother's cattle and does what? Walks them backwards. Well, guess what happens the first day Mercury rises into visibility? It's retrograde. It's walking backwards.
Right.
And then within a day or two of that, it stations direct, and that causes it to get higher and brighter very quickly. So the stations essentially with Mercury and only with Mercury mark the heliacal rise and set roughly within a couple days. And that's actually, I'm working on the second book of the Triptycha because Hermetica Triptycha not only points to this triptych of alignments that I go in the first, but it points to a series of three books that I'm writing. And I'm talking about in the second book, I'm talking about this event of heliacal rise, which, Robert Schmidt calls this phasis.
Right, where you have that little green flash, right? And
Yeah, there's this.
process and your life, when it happens in a certain way, your life is saturated by the symbolism of the planet you have in
Think about
process.
this
Like
for a second.
Demetra George has a Mercury faucet,
Mercury
right?
is at
Right?
heliacal
Heat,
rising, and
right?
Demetra
Yep.
George, and her life is saturated with what? Writing books and giving talks.
And
I
lectures,
mean,
right? Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? And so, but
I
think
do.
about that for a second. Think about what he's saying. Think about it. So in a given chart, Mercury's going to rule three houses, basically. Well, actually, Mercury's only two because his exaltation is in one of his signs of
Right.
domicile. But let's say Saturn, for instance, will rule three houses. It'll rule Capricorn, Aquarius, and Libra.
Libra. Yeah.
Okay, so Saturn's going to be really busy in those three houses, but he's saying when a planet's in phasis, it saturates the entire chart with its significations. That's a really profound statement, man.
It is.
It's way more profound than I think it is obvious at the. And so the idea of an appearance that speaks um, was one of the reasons why I got into this visual astrology thing because I was like,
Bill
wait a
John
second, if there's an appearance that speaks, I want to hear it. You know what?
Bill Johnson wrote a very good article for an NCGR journal back in 2011, and I was going to have Schmidt write it, but he passed it on to Bill. And if you've never seen that article, I'll get it to you.
Yeah, Bill was really, really deeply involved there for a while.
And Bill, I someone translated Babylos on Fases, but it's never turned up in Schmidt's writings. But there was a
Mm,
whole separate little essay I really want to check out. Let me pull us back. Let me pull us back to the PowerPoint because
make sure there's nothing
ask
that's
you I just want to
okay.
ask you about some of this stuff that the only person ever really I saw talking about it was Mr. Maestro Morrison. So
Yeah, that's right. You wanted to go back to that. Okay.
let me, and of course, this book, The Best of Al H. Morrison, Karen Christino assembled, and Al's papers, I think his grandnephew just delivered his papers to the California, not California, bad, Celestial Arts and Education Library. And it's going to be
Wow.
possible to get access to Al's papers. I don't know what shape they're in.
Incredible.
And but Karen just came out with a second edition of the Best of L. H. Morrison. So, like your book, it's something people should
Love that
have.
guy. Yeah,
Right. So
100%.
here I have some quotes of Al. In geocentric astrology, it is important to note whether the next coming conjunctions of Mercury and Venus are going to be inferior or superior. This makes a great difference in delineating the chart. So he's just talking about general chart delineation. In the superior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun, Mercury is invariably direct in motion, and you explain it so beautifully, as seen from the Sun. The native, however intelligent, seems to act spontaneously and without obvious appearances of consideration or any hesitation, such as decision making, often requires. The superior conjunction combust Mercury, serves more of a profiling modulation of the sun's thrust rather than a channel for the solar energy.
Mm, that's really
You have to
wild.
read that a few times to get it. And also, the inferior conjunction always finds Mercury retrograde in apparent motion. Its location between the sun and the earth tends to channel the thrust of the sun through the field of Mercury's influence. Thus, all the action normally attributed to the sun is compressed into the workings of the logic mill, our intellect. This gives a native much given to thinking about what is to be done, the how and why of what's to be done. This should not be confused with the effects noted in charts with very heavy third house emphasis, which may signify clerical and languages work. And then
Yeah,
there's
so
one
he's
more.
literally talking about the information processing the your computer and like does it have a lot of RAM? Does it is it obvious that the computer is like looping? Like there's some people like Demetra, for instance. Demetra, when I first began talking to Demetra, I had to really catch myself because Demetra will pause, sometimes quite lengthy, before she responds. And I wasn't at first when I didn't know her that well. I wasn't sure if she heard me or something, and
Did
then
she
I
not like
realized,
the question? Right.
or
Yeah.
did she, yeah, or did I say something wrong, right? But I real like, so that she was literally processing I was saying and what she wanted to say, and you could see it, like there was this pause. So that's what
A
he's
great
saying.
example.
Right? Now, and why was it difficult for me? Because I'm born in the exact opposite. I'm born with Mercury going towards the superior conjunction, which means Mercury is moving really freaking fast. He's blazing along in direct motion, and I'm processing things a million miles a minute. Yeah, I'm one of those people where he was saying the first one, what was the one he said? He said something about somebody can be involved in decision making and there will be no outward appearance of it.
No hesitation.
No
Right.
hesitation. Like that's
No,
me. Like I
no
can,
outward consideration.
like, yeah, somebody will ask me something and boom, I'll tell them the answer and you won't see, there will be no blip in it, but there was a lot going on there. You just didn't see it. Whereas with Demetra, who was born in the opposite part of the cycle, you can see it. Like she
You can see
literally
the
will
wheels are
pause,
turning. The
you
wheels
know?
are turning in her head. She's
And it's incredible because oftentimes what she comes back with is very profound, so that your wheels then begin to turn because of the depth of what she was able to deliver by pausing. Whereas for me, what I had to learn was to not just instantly spit back the very first thing that my computer spits out, but to actually follow her example and to let that processing complete itself and then sort through and decide, okay, what part of this do I really want to address? And that came only with age, Scott.
yep.
It only slowed down with age. With age comes wisdom. It's true, you
I
know?
have Mercury in Aries, so I'm not sure it always comes with age.
Yeah.
I'm a blurter.
Yes,
Now,
I'm still a blurter. Yeah, I'm still a blurter, but the blurting is more modulated now. Like I know there's some times where, and it's probably like some ADD, a little bit.
well,
I've never,
that's a very interesting application because
you
does it
know,
seem like entire groups of people born in a year are more prone to ADHD than others?
you
Let me
know,
just finish with Al. So,
uh-huh.
did you ever see Al's work on Mercury next ahead of the sun?
Yes.
Okay, so if natal Mercury is earlier in the zodiac than the natal sun is, the incoming information is hastily dumped into what may be called a memory bank. If natal Mercury is later in the zodiac, i.e., it rises later than the natal sun, the incoming information is compared and cross referenced against already received information and filed accordingly. In other words, what the person does with the information brought in by the senses is indicated by the position of Mercury relative to the sun.
Yeah.
Boom, right?
Yeah, and it's really easy. Like this is very much in Hellenistic astrology, by the way. Like Dorotheus would talk about, um, usually, for instance, they will talk about, especially the superior planets in their morning sky phases are much more energetically
Expressed.
expressive,
Yeah.
because it's like there's this instant, like what he's calling about a dump of, there's this instant expression. Whereas, and think about it, what are we doing in the morning? We're getting up, we're going about our day, like we have the whole day ahead of us and we're just doing. Whereas in the evening, what are we doing? We're sitting around talking with friends about what happened during our day. We're chewing the fat over what's already happened. So the nature of evening is reflective, whereas the nature of morning is active. That's what it's that's what he's talking about there. And it's
Exactly. And this is why. those people that are not morning people are working with a minor disadvantage in a way. They're flying in the face of cosmic rhythm, right? Although each zodiac is crafted by the cosmos to be what it needs to be. So,
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So
so we
they,
got to So it's fascinating to me that the only place I've seen this work of yours foreshadowed is in some of the research that Al did. I'll just finish with this. He's talking about having a hasty Mercury. At
yeah.
times, Mercury has an apparent motion of considerably more than 1 degree per day,
And this,
running
by the
faster
way,
than the
is when
sun.
it is more towards the superior conjunction.
Yes, when it will go 1 degree beyond the sun, right? Am I
Yeah.
getting that right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
I find people with this fast natal Mercury, this was what Al wrote, much less critical in their acceptance of views, opinions, rather than their own. They may disagree totally while still managing to understand how the other fellow came to whatever
Now
conclusion
think
has been
about that
reached.
for a minute. Think about that for a minute. What is the position of Mercury relative to the Earth at superior conjunction? Is it farther away from the Earth or closer to the Earth?
Oh, this is one of those questions.
Superior means above. It means above. So it's Mercury's on the other side of the sun. So
Right, it's
there's
farther.
it's farther. There's a
Yeah,
distance. There's objectivity. When Mercury is retrograde, it's between the sun and the earth. There's a closeness. And so that's the problem with retrograde is when we get the retrograde, it's not just the backwardness, it's that we're too close to something to
the
have any
subjectivity.
objectivity about
Right,
it.
right. We can't see the forest for the trees, right?
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, and so when you have this, and so when you have this fast moving Mercury, it's also far from the Earth. And so there's an amount of objectivity there, and there's an ability to process a lot of stuff really fast. And so they can literally go in their mind, okay, so what this guy is saying is this, and it reminds me of what this other person said, and I have a personal experience that relates to this. Okay, I totally disagree with them, but I understand how they would come to that conclusion, and so it's all good. Like that
Right.
can all literally happen relatively quickly. Yep, that's
So anyway, there's a strong thrust toward finding the simple or simplistic basis for whatever opinion is pursued. I'm not even 100% sure what he meant there, but it's just interesting. Now I hate myself for this. I just have to mention Roxana Muse and the shadow of Mercury retrograde. Could you contain yourself to like 4 or 5 minutes?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I want to say something. It builds humility, right? When people die in our global community now, within 4 or 5 years, new astrologers don't really know who they are. So
yeah.
for those of us in this room full of this Zoom room full of veteran astrologers, many of us know that Roxana Muse was the person that first wrote about and came up originally with the whole concept of the shadow of Mercury retrograde. It caught on so fast that many people just thought it was, you
Always
know,
there.
always there, ancient
Yeah.
wisdom. So I was trying to find us a picture of Roxana, and
Nice.
she's only been gone 5 or 6 years. This was the one picture I
Wow.
could find on the internet. There used to be many more, and
There's
that's Carol.
David, right?
There's
Is that
Carol
David
Tebb.
Cochran
There's
and
David.
Giselle?
That's yep. And
Giselle, Ray Merriman.
yep. So this is
Wow.
an ISAR group. Why was this picture online? Because everyone in this picture headed ISAR at some point, right? So
Ah, wow. I did not know that about
yeah.
Roxanne.
So anyway,
Wow.
but so I'm just putting this in context. It would amaze Roxana that people would correct her or start telling her about the shadow of Mercury retrograde. So whatever you feel about this theory, and it does seem to hold up in certain situations. I know you have very strong opinions about this.
I do. And so now here so look, I think I don't know, and I would love to have had this conversation, but I'm guessing that where this theory comes from is that, in her client work, people would report experiences of they would report retrograde like experiences before the retrograde happened and after.
So, like mechanical things breaking
Yeah, weird shit.
down,
Like, wait, you said Mercury retrograde wasn't until next week, but it's already freaking me out.
scheduling mix-ups.
What the
You know,
hell's going on, Roxana? Now, so how the hell do we explain that? I think this was her way of explaining that. And so, in that sense, I actually think it's admirable. And why? Because the client's experience is reality, right? You can't say, no, no, no. Like one way somebody could have dealt with that is said, no, no, no. You're being crazy. Mercury's not retrograde. That doesn't have to do with Mercury retrograde. You could have like tried to make the astrology the truth and the person's experience got denied. That would have been a really bad way of handling it, but it happens. We get caught up in thinking we're the arbiters of truth. And so in that way, I think that what she was doing was a very honorable and wonderful attempt to explain people's experience. Um, the
But
problem,
that said, do you think
yeah,
it's being abused in our postmodern
yeah, the problem
astrology
that the
world?
problem that I have with it is that, there becomes this quality of don't do this, that, or the other during the retrograde, and then that gets extended to the shadows. And guess what? That's half your life. If you extend the shadows and you're saying don't do this, that, or the other, half your life goes by and you can't do this, that, or the other. I can't live like that,
And
dude.
it's not just Mercury. People do these rules for
Oh
Venus
my God,
retrograde, Mars retrograde.
if
Right.
you
Yeah.
start doing the deal with other planets, it extends out even more. Especially when you get out towards the outer planets, it's literally like always in the shadow, you know? And so that was my main thing is like, no, look, I'm not going to stop living just because of some shadow, and when I started understanding these loops, what what I've learned is that you can't just uniformly paste the same shadow on each end of every single retrograde because what I think is driving the experience of pre-retrograde and post-retrograde change is that this is when the planet changes in the latitude extremely quickly. There's a lot of actual measurable change happening in the vertical dimension of a planet's motion before and after the actual retrograde. But in some loops, it'll be more towards the front end. So the pre-retrograde will be very volatile, whereas the post-retrograde, it's just cruising along kind of normal. And so if you were to paste the pre and post-retrograde shadow and treat them the same, that wouldn't actually fit with the reality of the planet's motion. And so ultimately, what I've said about this is that it's an admirable attempt to explain human experience. But ultimately, simpler theories are better. And the simplest theory is that the actual movement of the planet is what's driving the human experience. And the actual movement of the planet changes quite a bit before and after the retrograde, but it's not always the same. Sometimes it's more before, sometimes it's more after, and sometimes it's mainly during the retrograde, and that before and after are kind of normal. So the amount of shadow, the kind of shadow is very different for each different kind of retrograde. And so it's a lot more complex than it appears to be when if we just do this simple pasting shadows before and after the retrograde
This
thing.
sounds like book four of the triptych. So
Yeah.
book 3A. Do
Yeah,
you
this is the
when you try to explain this to people, do you encounter surprising resistance?
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they instinctively know that that there's something true about it, and they instinctively feel me saying that it's not true. but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's a better way to do it.
It's true, but not for the reason you think it's true.
100%.
Yeah.
And not in the way you think it is either. It's absolutely true, but there's a better way to do it, and that will a serve to educate people about what actual planetary motion is, and thus make the art better. Um, and B, it will probably yield you better results in the end because you'll know, like, oh, wow. Like literally, when you watch these loops, it looks like so Mercury will go way up and then boom, it's falling off the edge of a cliff, or you're
Uh,
at the place where the roller coaster goes zoom. Like that's the probably the place where I want to watch during you can actually zoom in right on the time where that's when the place where I'm going to expect things to be volatile, and on the other end it just kind of smooths out. And so it to me it just makes a lot more sense to dial in. And but hey, I'm a Virgo moon, so what are you gonna
what
expect?
are you going to do? You're going to take a lot of showers. That's what you're going to do. More than most people. Um, so I'm just, just to wrap up, you've really created a symbolically complex but user-friendly technique to re-envision the natal dynamics and implications of our Mercuries. And I just hope your book gets widely read over time and gets some attention.
Thank
And
you, man.
sometimes negative attention's okay too,
Yeah, negative attention is fine. There were some people who thought that, you know, the ephemeris was easy to do, which I can guarantee you. Try it. That's all I have to say about that.
oh, I
Like,
know.
yeah,
I
try
know.
it.
Well, you talk about conscious and unconscious waves of
Hmm.
mercurial knowing and experience. And in a sense, the way you spoke about it is both this unconscious and conscious cultural zeitgeist that different groups of people come in with. It really made me think. It evoked the idea of the dreaming, of the Aboriginal version of the Aboriginal word
Yes.
of that.
Dreaming for them was like dreaming the world into existence, right? We're constantly dreaming the world into existence,
And
and
that's
so,
not necessarily thought of as a Mercury thing, right?
yeah, but
But
Mercury was the god of dreams, bro. Totally.
well, earlier, yes, he
Yeah.
was.
Yes,
And
it was.
so I'll just tell people to get this book. I also want to reassure those of you who have been sort of following this conversation as you're doing something else. These concepts are graspable, are easy to grasp, since I can't say that word, and
Yeah.
simple. And don't be intimidated
Yeah.
because there's some astronomy
Yeah, no, we're going to
mixed
break
up
it down. I'm
there.
going to make it easy for everybody. I've been doing it long enough now that I've got it pretty
You've
distilled.
got it streamlined, and we
Yeah.
can talk about the descent and the ascent of Inanna if we have to, right? So I'm going to go one more slide in, and I want you to read it. All right.
Okay.
This is the description you provided me with of what's going to be your talk in 2026 at
Well, now they
UAC.
still have I submitted 3 lectures and they
Ah,
still have to pick. So this
they
might
okay.
be one of them.
Okay.
But
This is a
this
talk
is
you'll
the
give somewhere to someone, and I want
100%. This is a talk
yeah.
that I'm going to give, and this is the last chapter that I was talking about where I became confident that yes, the spirit of Hermes is moving through me. So the 12 Mercury elemental year returns. This is every 6 to 7 years. This is when the element that the three Mercury retrogrades is comes back to the one that you were born in. Okay. So discover a new astrological understanding of the fabled 7 year itch as a series of initiations within a lifetime developmental cycle. As the Mercury retrogrades complete a cycle through all four elements every 6 to 7 years, the natal elemental resonance is reactivated. In what becomes a series of perfections of the birth vintage, The Mercury retrogrades make a total of 12 returns to the element of the birth year over a 79-year period. Each of these perfections of the birth vintage serves to further clarify our collective mercurial mission and carries us through another wave in our evolution.
Beautiful. So, well, I want to be informed when this lecture is being given.
Right on.
And
And yeah, it very well could happen at UAC. There's three of them. That would be, it would be great if I end up doing it. But if not, we'll make sure it happens.
and Jess, for those of you who have stayed with us, here's the information once again. I will be there for the first 2 hours. I have a scheduling conflict at 2 p.m., so I'll be watching the recording like many other people. And Gary, thank you so much
Thank you, Scott. It's
for
wonderful to hang out, man. Yeah.
yeah, it's really fun. And probably
Thanks for
more
all the
fun for us.
pictures and all the yeah, like it feels like community, like what we're doing here, and that's awesome. That's one of the, and NCGR was my entry point into the community, by the way. I want to say that, like, the fact that they have local chapters for people to show up and meet folks like you and the folks that hold down these local chapters, I have tremendous respect for what they're doing. And so the fact that y'all have a chapter to be a member of is such an enormous blessing. And of course, it's a wonderful blessing for me too. And so thank you very much for uh, letting me share my stuff with your community. And thank you, NCGR, for, you know, holding space for these chapters for so many years
And
now.
we see the Mercury of the NCGR is changing and evolving. All the large organizations are going through so much change, and they've sort of
Yeah.
taken turns. AFA had their thing, then ISAR had their uh, flashpoint,
Yeah.
and I know the NCGR is making lots and lots of
I've
changes.
noticed, and it's great to
And
see. It's great to see them still doing their thing because, as I said, like that was my entry point, and I've been to so many different chapters over the years. I'm
well,
just
it's like
really
going to
happy.
visit a different branch of the family, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
exactly.
cousins. Now I'm going to go visit the cousins in Nevada, right? You
Yeah,
know, the ones I
exactly.
never met, right? So I'm glad Frank bought the Mountain Astrologer because I'm worried we're having fewer and fewer print journals now. Everything's sort of going electronic. The
Yeah,
Evolving Astrologer, which is a very worthy and wonderful new astrology journal, you can order hard copies. You
nice.
have to sort of poke around the website, and they're like $8 a piece. But um, so we'll see what happens. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
and do you have a little message for Christine, who's going to have to figure out how to edit this?
Look, man, my approach to editing has always been I turn it on at the beginning, I turn it off at the end, and it goes up like it is. So if you want to roll with that way, let it be what it is. Other than that, I got nothing. Sorry.
All right. Okay. I am going to now power down, as they say. Let's
All right.
see.
Thanks, Scott.
I'll pause it. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Yes,
Bye
sir.
bye now.